Welcome to the last theoretical class. As I told you yesterday, we are going to see JavaScript. The idea is just to give an introduction to JavaScript. I'm not requiring you to use JavaScript in the exam because we are just studying JavaScript now, so it's not required. But if I will try to show you some very specific things of JavaScript that might be useful for some specific functionalities of the exam. Okay, so the idea is just to give an overview of what is JavaScript, how to make it work, and I will try to make examples that fit with the exam requirements, okay? Okay, so the idea is basically to understand what is JavaScript and how to integrate JavaScript into our web page, into our web application. Then today we will learn like the basic syntax of JavaScript. As I told you, we won't see all the possible functions, we won't see all the possible alternatives we have with JavaScript, but just a specific subset of functions that might be useful for the exam. We will understand how JavaScript interacts with HTML through the DOM. I don't know if you remember what the DOM was. We saw it like at the very beginning of the course. Okay, we will update on that. Then we will see how JavaScript can manage events and how JavaScript can react to user events. So JavaScript is basically the way that we can, or the mean that we have to integrate interaction in the web site. And we will prepare for a small client-side interaction in the web applications, okay? So in our architecture, where do you think JavaScript falls? Where do you think JavaScript fits in this diagram? On the client or in the backend? In the client or in the server? Client, right? So here we will see why, but here in this interaction, when we talk about JavaScript, we are always talking about the front end. So let's have in mind that JavaScript lives in the front end and is something that runs in the browser. That the browser is by default the application that the final user or the front end uses. Okay? So JavaScript will work very similar to CSS in the sense that it's something that will be on the front end and it's something that will be imported and integrated into the HTML. Okay? Have you ever used JavaScript for something before? What for? What for? No, I'm asking if in the past you have used JavaScript and for what? For a web page. Okay, and which kind of, what did you implement with JavaScript? Okay.
To give dynamics to a page, like for example, if you click on an image, I think that there is a tag called on-click.
Yeah.
To an image, so when you click on it, you bring to another page instead of public a tag.
Sure. So that something happens in the page. Yeah. Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. You? Okay. Okay, nice. React is, for instance, the framework that is built with JavaScript, but React is a more advanced framework that you will see in the Web Applications 1 course that I think all of you have to take. I don't know. That is, in the Magistrale, it's like in the first year course, and it's web application. So in that case, you will be using or implementing all of the front end using a framework. In this case, we didn't use a framework on the front end, but in Web Applications 1 you will, and it will be React, that is something based on JavaScript. I'm saying this because JavaScript can get as complex or as sophisticated as we want. Here, once again, it's just an introduction of the basic functions, and I will try to show these functions in perspective with the requirements of the final exam. Okay. So once again, to remember, this slide was a slide that we saw at the beginning of the course, and we basically had like the specific definitions of the components in the front end. So we said that HTML is the one that is useful to give a structure to the page. Then CSS is the one that is responsible of giving the styling to a page. And then in this schema, what is JavaScript for? JavaScript is the one that adds interactivity to a page, okay? So JavaScript is the way to add some interactivity and to enable some interactions, to do some manipulations of the elements in the DOM. That is the one that is able to capture events, to respond to specific user events. That, for instance, when the user clicks a button, the JavaScript script is able to identify or detect that specific action and do something about that. So it's basically the one that is able to add interactivity by dynamically understanding how the page works. And as we said before, it runs on the browser. So JavaScript is something on the front end, and it's something that runs in the browser. Let me check something. So for instance, these kind of animations, the fact that when I put the cursor over these buttons, it shows a specific portion of text, is something that is achieved through JavaScript, no? Because it is not a static behavior, but it's an animation that he is able to do dynamically, and we said that it's dynamically because it depends on the user action. So it depends on how the user, the final user, interacts and behaves with the components in the page, and according to that, he shows a specific portion of the website. So for instance, when I place the mouse in here, the cursor in here, he shows me, or he understands that he must make visible this section or this container, okay? What else? This one might be also JavaScript, no? That when he understands that I arrived to this point of the layout, he starts the animation with the numbers, for instance. So it's able to add interactivity dynamically based on the user behaviors, based on how the user interacts with the page. And if we take a look at okay, no, we won't take a look here because it's kind of confusing, but okay, so what can JavaScript do specifically, or what are we going to explore today? It can show or hide some parts of a form. I don't know if you can think of the exercise in which parts of the exam it would make sense to show or hide some parts of the form. Okay, we'll get to that. It can check simple input before submitting. So to check the values that the user has inserted into a form before submitting it and doing it dynamically. It can add or remove fields dynamically in a form. So for instance, yesterday we were saying that in our exam or in the text that I proposed to you, one participant is able to register himself, but he's also able to register at most other 3 participants, no? But we don't know in advance how many participants is going to register in the free walking tour. Do you know what I mean? So how many fields are you going to give the participants, or how are you going to deal with the fact that there is not a fixed number of other participants that will participate in the tour? You know what I'm referring to? So in this case, for instance, JavaScript is something that can give us a hint or how to dynamically show fields in a form depending on both the user behavior or on the user specifications. It can update messages or counters, filter visible cards, for instance, but in this case it's not just filter visible cards, but filter any component, any HTML component. So for instance, when I said we want to implement a filter in the or a search function in our page, so that when the user writes something, based on what he writes, filters the available tours that are consistent with the information or with the filter that the user is applying. So it's something that can be also managed through JavaScript and to preview selected files. Once again, I repeat this because I said it at the beginning of the lesson, but I will repeat it again. For the final exam, it is not required to implement the functionalities using JavaScript, okay? So it's not a requisite, but if you feel that you can and you want to try to implement the functionalities with JavaScript, nice, okay? Otherwise, if you implement them without JavaScript, it's fine too. Today, I will be giving you some basics on JavaScript, and I will try to give you examples that are somehow fit with the functionalities that are required in the exam. If you want to integrate them in your final solution, it's fine, but it's not required, okay? So how do we create a JavaScript file and how do we integrate into HTML? Basically the same as we have done with CSS. So here, instead of creating a .css file, we create a JS file. In this case, for instance, we created a script and we import that into the head of the HTML. So as you can see here, I create the file script.js and I imported that file in the head of the HTML file. So nothing different from what we have done so far. It can be written in a separate JS file. The browser loads and executes this script. So at the end, it is the browser who executes the script, and the code is executed from top to bottom. So JavaScript is basically a new programming language. So I will give you just like the basic constructs of the language, and here when you use JavaScript, you will see let and const that are like the two variable possible declarations. We use const when there is something that will be keep constant, and we use let when we perceive or when we think that a variable will change, okay? So in this case, for instance, basically we declare two variables. Here, nothing spectacular. We created this const. We created the first one as a const because we think that one might be something that should be kept constant, while the second one is something that might change or might vary depending on the user action. So we declare this as let. And then we assign a specific value. Okay, so nothing very difficult. Then here there is something different maybe from the languages we have seen before, and it is the fact that the type belongs to the value, not to the variable. What does it mean? That when we declare a variable, we don't have to set a type for the variable, but we basically discover what is the type of the variable depending on the value. So for instance, the first one we know is a string, but we know this one is a string because of the value, not because of a declaration here, okay? So here we don't make any declaration specifying what is the value, but what is the type of the variable, but it depends basically on the value that we assign to a variable, okay? So in the first one, we have an example of a string. Then we can create another const that is called duration, and we can assign a number without doing anything different from what we did with the string. We can use the Boolean value, and we can use an array, okay? So in this case, it's not something very strict and very fixed concerning the type of the variable, but it's something that depends on the value that we assign to a specific variable. In this case, as usual, we have comparations and conditions. The syntax is pretty similar to any other syntax in which we use conditionals. So as you can see here, it has if and else. And there is something that is different. The only thing that is different is that when we try to perform a comparison, we do it with the 3 equals, not 2, but 3 equals, okay? 3 equal character. Okay, then we have the arrays that, as we saw before, we can declare them like this. So for instance, languages, and we can declare an array as English, Italian. There is something here. I did these examples thinking in the exam, but it is not that these examples are correct or they are consistent, or that I'm showing here something that you should use in the exam, okay? It's just like for giving some context, I use things related to exam, but just that. And here, when we have arrays, we can always do basically two kind of things. One of them is push, that it basically adds an element at the end of the array, or it can get the length of the array. They are like the two most useful functions. And we can iterate over a specific array in JavaScript, okay? Finally, we have the functions, that the syntax for a JavaScript function is something like this. Function, the name, the parameters, and with the curly brackets, we have the return and all of the instructions that within a JavaScript function are executed. Okay? But I don't know, this is super simple, this is super basic, but it is just like the primitive available functions and available syntax that we have with JavaScript. I don't know if you have any questions. Okay. And then, once again, we are talking about the DOM. Why do you think we are talking about the DOM? What does this have to do with JavaScript? Do you remember what the DOM was? Do you remember that an HTML was structured in such a way that it can be mapped basically to a tree structure, such as this? If you observe at this diagram, it is an HTML, no? So the root element is the HTML declaration. Within the root, we have the head on one hand, that is the that is this one, and on the other hand, we have a child, that is the body. Within the head, we have another attributes or child elements. One of them is the title and a specific value for the title, and on the body, we have all of the other elements. So basically, we said once that an HTML has a DOM structure, and a DOM structure is something that follows a tree structure, okay? Why do you think this makes sense, or this is important when talking about JavaScript? Okay, it is because JavaScript basically achieves the interaction with the website by doing manipulations on the DOM, okay? So which kind of manipulations JavaScript might be doing with the DOM? Something like this. When the user puts the cursor or a specific element in the DOM, let's create or let's integrate this portion of HTML within a specific portion of the website, okay? Or when the user, for instance, when the user clicks on this specific element of the DOM, that is a button that is in the tree, I want to integrate or to insert into my tree, into my DOM tree in the HTML, a portion of HTML that makes, for instance, this box visible, okay? Or when the user, let me see if I can find an example here. When the user clicks here, in that specific portion of the HTML or in that specific portion of the DOM that corresponds to this container, I want to show a different portion of text after doing an animation, okay? So basically, what we are doing with JavaScript and the interactivity that we are adding with JavaScript consists in manipulating the HTML DOM to show some specific components or some specific parts depending on the actions and on the behaviors of the users, okay? So that's basically why the DOM becomes important again in this case. How do you think in the DOM we can identify which button or which elements we are interacting with? With the ID. Basically with the ID, or with the classes, no? Because if, for instance, we want 5 buttons to behave in the same way, we might be using the classes of the button, no? So if we want that when the user places the cursor over a button, the background becomes blue, and 5 buttons behaves in the same manner, instead of using the ID, we can also use the class, for instance, okay? So that's why in this point we are talking again about the DOM of the HTML. Okay, so the DOM is a browser internal representation of a web page. It is done by parsing the HTML, and each node corresponds to a part of the document. And this is the important thing here. It enables the dynamic content manipulation by enabling JavaScript to modify a web page content, structure, and style in real time. So for instance, what do you think we are doing here? Just by reading the code, what do you think it's happening there? There? So for instance, this document, what do you think it refers to? To the HTML, right? And then he does a selector, or he uses this function query selector, and as a parameter, what does he passes? Yeah. And then when he gets the element that is has associated that specific ID, he does the message.textContext and he changes the value of that specific element. Okay? Does it make sense? Let me see. This one instead, what is this one doing? Button that clicked, yeah. So in this case, first he points at the button. No, he gets a reference to a specific button, and he's able to get the button in by using also the ID of the element, and then he adds an event listener. So in this case, this function is particularly important because it's the one that enables us to hear interactions with the specific elements in the page. So I can add an event listener in this case, since this was a button, the event listener that I added was click, no? Because I want to understand when the button was clicked. But there are some other common events, such as click, change, submit. So for instance, submit, when do you think we are using submit? When submitting a form, and we want to do something like that. Or input, where do you think we can use input? Or what do you think input refers to? In a form, when?
For example, like input some text area or something.
When the user is writing something, no? So when the user is typing something, have you seen those pages that you start writing, and depending on that, it starts filtering the contents, or showing suggestions, or auto-completing something? So it is done by using JavaScript. That detects a specific action from the user, that is, he's writing something and an input, and depending on the value that the input is getting at each moment, he performs some action. And Bo, do you have questions so far? Everything is clear? Oh, so let's try to do some examples in practice. Okay, so here in our typical example, we don't have like many material to work on JavaScript, but I will try to integrate some basic examples, and if there is something that I can show you on this one, I will show a specific separate example. So for instance, something that comes to my mind that we can do on this page, having this structure, is the fact that we have tutors, no? So let's suppose that we want to create a functionality to filter the tutors, or to do a search over the list of tutors, okay? So right now, without using JavaScript, how would you implement that functionality of doing a search or filtering the tutors? If you had to implement the functionality, how would you implement the functionality of searching for a specific tutor? Probably with a form, no? With a text field here and with a search button that when you submit the button, he does a request to the backend, and then the backend retrieves a page with the filtered tutors. Do we agree on that? In that case, though, let's consider that we are doing a request to the server, and it is the server that is giving us back another HTML with the information that we need. Okay, so that's one alternative. It's how we are doing the things now and how you're supposed to do also the things in the exam, and it works. What is the thing that might change, or why we might be using JavaScript in this case? Because if here in the page, in our HTML, we already have all of the tutors, let's suppose that here we are showing all of the tutors, so that we are having all of the information already available here. So if we already have all of the information available here in the front end, in the front end of the application, what we might do is, again, creating that search field, but instead of asking the server to retrieve us another page with the filtered ones, dynamically filtering the contents that we already have here, no? So for instance, suppose that we already have, let's say that we don't have 3, but we have 100 tutors here. So instead of sending a request to the server and asking the server to retrieve us the filtered list of tutors, we can directly manipulate the ones that we have here, the information that we already have in the HTML, and filter them without doing a request to the server. So everything is managed directly in the front end. So okay, so I basically just did an HTML modification to add this specific field in the top of the page. Nothing particular. Here, what did I do? I created the JavaScript file. So if you observe at this, I created also the JavaScript file in the same folder, in the same static folder. So I have the images, I have the styles, that is the CSS files, and here I just created a folder that I called JS, and I created my script here. So what I'm going to create here, the script that manipulates the HTML and that adds interaction to the website based on the definitions or the rules that I write it here. So what do you think it's going to be our approach here? What are we going to, or how are we going to implement this filter functionality using JavaScript? What will be the reasoning here? According to the functions that we saw on the slide. Are we going to listen to a button? No. What are we going to listen? To the changes in the text field. Okay, so our event is going to be the input in the text field. And then what are we going to do with that input? Based on the value that the user inserts here, we're going to change or to erase specific cards of the HTML or to show specific cards of the HTML. No, that's basically what we are going to do in this case, to manipulate in this case. So, here in the button, what was the first thing that we did? To reference the element that we are going to listen to, okay? So in our case, the element we are going to listen to or to pay attention to is the input field. So basically, we reference the search input by doing the document.querySelector, and we use this search input. Why does it work? It works because here we set this input element in the HTML, the ID search input. So by doing this, we are already referencing that specific element into the HTML. Now what are we doing here? We're getting all of the cards, no? We're getting all of the cards that we have. We're getting all of the cards that we have in the HTML. Why do we know that this is not just one? Okay, for instance, here you see that the function is querySelector. We are expecting to get one element. Here is not querySelector anymore, but is querySelector all. Why? Because we are expecting to get more, potentially more than one element. In our HTML, we have that for each tutor, we create a new card, and we associate with all of them a class that is called tutor card. Okay? So in this way, we're gathering all of the cards that have this class inside. Okay, and then what is this function for? What are we doing here? We're adding a listener. We are adding the listener to the search input. And do you remember that with the button in here, the option was click? In this case, it's not click, but input, because we want to listen to each input within that specific text field, okay? So each time that we add the event listener so that each time that the input changes, this function executes, okay? Do we want this function to execute each time the input changes? Yeah, because depending on the value of that specific input, we're filtering, or we are continuous trying to filter the cards available in the text. Just to make sure that it works, instead of doing something, I will just print in the console the search text that the user is inserting. So let's see if it works. Should it be working? What are we missing? We created the JavaScript. We created the function. We make it consistent with the HTML, but what are we missing? We didn't. So it's basically the same as with the CSS. If you create the CSS, but you don't import the CSS, nothing will work. Where do you think we should import or link this JavaScript? Which file? Base. Okay. So as you can observe in the console, each time I write something, he's capturing the actions, no? And it works when I write or when I delete or whatever I do, he's capturing the actions. So the nice thing here is that we are not doing anything with the backend. Everything is happening just on the front end. So all of the interaction is happening in our browser and is happening with the final user. We're not doing any request to the backend. Okay, so it's interaction that we were able to add to the website on the front end that is visible to the final user. Okay, so the first part is done because it captures the action that happened here. And now what should happen? That depending on the value that is inserted here, it should show or hide specific cards within this container. Okay. Okay, so if I show you this code, what do you think it's happening there? What is our approach in here to solve the issue, or to solve the filtering of the tutors? So first of all, the first important thing to notice is that all of this is happening within the event listener, no? So we added an event listener to the search input. So we want to listen to that specific search input, and each time that an input occurs or an input happens, I want to trigger the function that I will define you within these curly brackets, okay? So the first important thing to notice is that all of this is happening within the event listener of the text field. And then what are we doing here? First of all, we are getting the search text, no? Because without the search text, it's not possible to understand what is specifically the value that the user is setting into the input. Okay, with these filter tutors, I'm not doing anything, but what is happening here? And is it clear why these cards works, or what are we gathering in these cards? We're getting all of the elements in the HTML that have this, or that belong to this specific class, that is tutor card. No? So if I take a look at the tutors.html, I see that here I set this class tutor card to all of the cards that represent a tutor within the HTML. So here I'm pointing out at all of the elements that have this specific class. Okay, and then what's happening here?
Inside the car, it finds the same text we inserted in the input.
Yeah.
It will remove the class display now, so it will show the element. But my question is, does it look for that string inside the whole card? Like for example, if
Yeah,
how is it structured the card? Is the name and then
the name, and then there was this description, and then there was this one.
if instead of introduction to an application, someone writes the name,
Yeah, it will still work.
it will still work.
Yeah, because here, but it will still work because here we are getting all of the text context within the card. So it is getting everything. All of the text that it is there, it is getting it. Okay? If we wanted to do something more particular, more specific, what should we do? For instance, if I don't want it to get, because this one is useless, because I don't want, I mean, all of them work because all of them have the string learn more. But if I want just, for instance, to be the name,
I have to look for the class about the card and then
should,
inside.
and then inside of it, you should reference somehow the, for instance, here we should be adding a class like tutor name, and based on that, you should be, let me check if it works just by changing this. Yeah, so in this case it works just, okay, I already got the card by doing this query selector all. So I reference all the cards. And within that card, I execute another query selector to focus on the name, on the specific field that corresponds to the name. How do I know that I'm referencing the name? Because here in the HTML, to the name label or to the name field, I assign this class. So the class here, the goal of adding a class here is not for styling that element, but for being able to reference that element from a JavaScript script. So I reference the element and I just use the text content within an element of this kind to filter the contents or to filter the tutor's name. So now if I write just Alberto, it shows the last one. If I write Juan, it shows the first one. And if I write Luigi, it shows the middle one. Okay. In this case, why do you think that it keeps the space in the middle? Because the ideal would be the cards to arrange so that they don't leave that empty space. Why do you think they leave that space in the middle? Do you remember the difference between display known and hidden? That one of them was like they just don't show the element, and the other one is that it basically removes the element from the HTML so that the space could be occupied by a different one. So here we are using display known. And with display known, it removes the HTML, it doesn't show the element, but keeps the space. With hidden, it should be different. Let me see if in Bootstrap. Oh. Ah, okay. No, it's not because of that, but it is because we are setting everything within a grid. So in the grid, it keeps the positions within that specific grid. So well, that's why it keeps the space in the middle. Although there is something that I don't know if you noticed that I did, that was not using the Bootstrap class for the display none, but using my own CSS class. So here in my own CSS class, I created this property. So it is just as useful as we have done so far. There is one thing that you must pay attention though, and it's the fact that here in the base, which is the last element that we import? The script. What happened if we import the script above the class, the CSS? Okay, in this case, it seems still to work. But the best practice is to leave this one as the last one, because in that way he can know that the CSS have some specific rules that he can use. Otherwise, he might not be seeing or he might not be conscious of the CSS rules that have been defined in the CSS file. Okay? So usually the good practice is to leave this one at the end. Clear? So for what does might function be useful for you? It might come to my mind the search function or the filtering function in the when you want to filter the guides, the guides in the exam text. So filtering by language or filtering by something else, you can do it by using a JavaScript. Okay. So these were like the three filtering criteria. So the same as we are doing with the input, you might be doing not just with an input, but with a different form element. No? So that if, for instance, a select box change, then upon that change, you can filter the elements that you can find there. Okay. Questions so far? Was it clear how it works? Okay, so Bo, let's make a break and see you here in 15 minutes.